Pirate Yakuza is a game that I have beaten now. This statement is indeed in reference to my most recent video on the game, and since that video was made before I beat the game, I can say that my opinions from that video have, not at all shifted. Thank you to everyone who watched it, and to those of you who haven't, well, long story short, it was a very fun game. So fun, in fact, that I've been enjoying running around in circles fighting enemies with no goal at all besides just having fun. But the game's burdened by a lot of weird decisions. I wouldn't say they're bad decisions, but it's like if you saw someone wanting to turn 90 degrees to their left, so they decide to turn 270 degrees to their right instead. Sure, they got the job done, but there was definitely a way better way to do it. Now, originally this video was going to be like a review type of thing, but I feel that most recent video of mine pretty accurately summed up how I felt about the game overall. So it's instead time to bring back a long since dead series of mine and tell you how Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza, and Hawaii could have been way better. Except this time, I'm not going to be taking the piss, and instead I'm going to be very serious. I'm not going to bring up any spoilers, and I promise this isn't just some negativity rant, because instead this video is essentially going to be some constructive criticism and feedback for RGG Studio that they'll probably never see, but maybe if they do, they might realize their foolish ways and just make Judgment 3 already. The first thing I want to talk about is something I didn't go into too much detail about in my last video, and is also kind of the main shtick with this game, and that's obviously the pirate stuff. In an unintentional quest to piss off a weirdly high number of people, I'm going to mention two words a fair number of times throughout this section: assassins and... hang on, wait a minute. Creed. Even if there's some other game out there that does a better job of pirate stuff, I think probably the most famous example since 2013 has been Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. And if you're based, there's also Assassin's Creed Rogue, which made a small number of changes and improvements to Black Flag's naval stuff. And the entire time I played Pirate Yakuza, I am constantly just... I don't know, I guess just daydreaming about playing Assassin's Creed instead of this. It's still fun, it's still enjoyable, but it's lacking in a lot of things that I think could have made it a lot better. Yes, it's their first time doing something like this. Yes, it's only been a year since Infinite Wealth. Yes, it's a side story, so basically a canon spin-off. Yes, it's all that stuff, but there's no reason why we can't point out the flaws, because I actually kind of hope that they make a bunch of improvements in the next game and turn the ship stuff into a side mode in Like a Dragon 9 or something, because I think that they can make something great out of it. But here's one of the first things that I thought could have made it better, although this thing I can definitely agree with people who disagree with what I'm gonna say. The only thing on the boat that you can aim is the rocket launcher, as in the thing that I used like twice. I don't know, what do you want from me? The cannons on the side auto-lock when a side of your ship is facing an enemy and they're in range, and the machine guns just fire perfectly straight ahead. Now, here's the part you can disagree on. Aiming the cannons, like you can in Assassin's Creed, does add a layer of complexity to the intentionally simple gameplay loop of the ship combat, but all you do with the cannons is spin in a circle until one side recharges, or until you've done a 180 so that you can fire your other side because they don't share a cooldown, and then you just press one button and boom, damage. In Assassin's Creed, your shots fire in a wide range and eventually narrow down for a more precise shot, rewarding timing, accuracy, and patience. And what's more, the cannons and the heavy shots, which is an alternate fire mode that fires stronger shots with them having a shorter range and a limited capacity, both share the same cooldown. So during their cooldown, you can do other stuff, which I'll mention later. Again though, the cannons working the way they do makes it much more straightforward, which if you've ever played a Yakuza game, you'll know that they are intentionally made super simple for people to quickly figure out how to play. But despite that, something you should be able to do is aim the machine guns. When you hop off the wheel, you can actually jump on one yourself and aim it in a radius you'd expect to see, but on the ship, you have to wonder what the hell is the point of actually assigning crew to them, because they just hold that shit dead still and fire straight ahead. Like, at that point, just give Majima a trigger to do it himself. Or let me actually aim the bloody things. In Assassin's Creed, your puckle guns were something you could use to fire at weak points that were exposed on a ship when you damaged them sometimes. Then I'm pretty sure it was Rogue that added the ability to fire them freely, although their main purpose was for still hitting weak points. The machine guns aren't just used for damage in this, but they're not as efficient as the cannons, so why can't I freely aim them? If I look to my right, I should be able to fire my right machine gun to my right. You can't even aim the things up or down, which means a lot of the time you can't adjust for the waves blocking your shots or just making them completely miss. The crosshair is pretty worthless too. Like, the only way to actually aim is just to fire, see how much you're missing, and then adjust from there. But of course, you can freely aim the rocket launcher, but you can only do it when you're not controlling the boat, for whatever reason. So, L1, LB, L whatever, is used for popping up Spotify when you hold it, and when you press it, it pops up the health of your crew. Both of these features are so absurdly useful, but they could have made it so that when you hold L1, you can aim the rocket launcher and fire with R1 without having to abandon the wheel. Or, alternatively, L1 could have actually been been used as a brace or block mechanic. When an enemy goes to attack you with whatever, quite literally your only two options are to boost away or just hope you somehow manage to avoid the hit. At lower levels you're usually fine, but when you get stronger enemies, those hits can be devastating. Of course, you can repair, but in Assassin's Creed you can brace for impact. This reduces any damage taken when your crew's braced, but you can't control the ship or attack or anything. It's a trade-off for less damage. You'd expect them to do some classic Yakuza stuff and make it so that when you press the guard button you'd put up some energy shield or something, but nope, there's just nothing. Upgrading your durability is just a health upgrade too, so unless there's some secret defense mechanics, there aren't any ways to reduce damage taken, and there's barely any ways to even avoid taking damage. So then you could have blocked or reduced damage with L1, and then with my rocket launcher idea, well, up and right on the D-pad do nothing on the boat, so maybe adjusting the camera could have been up and you could use left and right to navigate between weapons. What are those weapons? Well, I'm glad you probably didn't ask. One would be your cannons, then you scroll over to your rocket launcher, which you'd aim with the left trigger and fire with the right, then you can scroll over to mortars. Why the fuck don't I get mortars, but every enemy casually does? Alright, look, Assassin's Creed had mortars. Super powerful, super high range, had a comparatively lengthy cooldown, and had limited ammo. Why don't I get something like that, but the enemy does? Here's another thing. Why can't I do any sort of attack to my rear? It was a pretty niche use most of the time, but in Black Flag you got explosive barrels you could destroy, and in Rogue you just got a ball of fire you could place. And lastly, how the hell are there not special finishes when you land the last shot on an enemy boat like Assassin's Creed does? Like, surely boat heat actions could have been a thing, right? Or just the slow-mo like the game normally does, but yeah. Anyway, with all that being said, it is definitely still enjoyable, but it's all very repetitive. You don't have many options in Pirate Yakuza, so most encounters boil down to just spinning in circles and occasionally pressing a button, like I said earlier. Again, it's meant to be simple, and sure, someone could probably argue that maybe some of the ideas that I had would make things a bit overpowered, but there's a thing called balancing, and if they added those things, they would have to balance things. That's just, like, that's how games work. But anyway, a few extra layers to the ship combat would have definitely made it a lot more fun. Now, something else I didn't really touch up on in that last video was the side content and some of the open world exploration. We are all well aware of how much side content the game tries to force you to do. I don't want to repeat myself, but if you really want me to engage with your side content, could you at least do it in a significantly less intrusive way? Confession time. I'm going to be completely honest. I am perhaps the biggest Yakuza side content hater in the world, and I'm definitely being serious, and I'm definitely not exaggerating for comedic effect. Maybe it's because I've played so many of them and done so much stuff, but when I'm trying to get to a point to do something I want to do, and then suddenly the camera changes to another angle and a text box appears, I get violent. I don't care if this ends up being the magnum opus of comedy. I'm trying to do something else. Let me do the thing I want to do, and then I can come back here later, okay? Okay, the game says, as you're allowed to say no to every sub-story in the game and continue it later. Oh, but like, after 100 lines of dialogue. I mean, honestly, that's a criticism I have of every single Yakuza game, but fuck me, they really need to start considering cutting down the text boxes in various scenes, most importantly the sub-stories, to like a quarter. It's not some TikTok brain rot thing either, there's just so many filler lines that don't actually add anything to anything. All good to have that stuff in the main story dialogue, considering that expands on the worlds and the characters usually, but when it's a random sub-story NPC, just hurry up and get to the part in nearly every sub-story where there's either a misunderstanding or a character gets mad at the protagonist for whatever reason and tries to fight them, then loses, then the sub-story ends. Sub-stories in these games have a lot of nothing, when they easily could have a lot of something. Now again, although I skip a lot of it these days, I have done plenty of sub-stories and played plenty of minigames, and I know that there exists ones that stand above the rest. I mean, the classic one in Zero, where you defend Michael Jackson from zombies, is both hilarious, but also pretty unique. But it also stands above the rest, because out of the 100 that are in that game, a lot of them are just pointless filler that takes 10 minutes to complete for some reason. Or all of the bucket list stuff in Infinite Wealth, which I did, because it was all about things that I actually care about, but then it grants me cumulative rewards that make Kiryu better in combat. I know all of the side content in all of the games can be good, and I know of course that people enjoy it, but I know how it can be better. I'm not definitely on 7, I don't vehemently hate old women, but I do hate seeing the same shit over and over again. I mean, have I ever told you the definition of insanity? There's just so much stuff that's just the same thing again and again, things that I feel like I've done a million times already. Most of the time too, there's nothing really to gain from doing a sub-story. Sure, you might get a laugh, but the actual reward for completing it ranges from something like the Street Surfer in Infinite Wealth to a stick with some leaves attached to it, or some shit. And there's no telling which thing will give you what before you finish it unless you look it up. Both do the same thing, both take as long as each other, but they don't both give the same quality reward. I've done every single side quest in Final Fantasy 16, and I would gladly do it again. Cry all you want that I'm talking about the best game ever made, but I have a point to make. There's a stupid amount of side quests in this game, and a lot of them are just go to a spot, kill some enemies, and then head back and there's your reward. But all of them are fully voiced with absurdly good voice acting and dialogue, and so many of them tell such fascinating stories. There's also a handful of them at the end of the game that add beautiful notes to the game's main cast and main story. Some of them could even quite easily make you cry. Even the ones about random side characters make you really care about the people involved. The rewards are relevant to the length and the difficulty of the side quest. You can do a big lengthy quest line and get the strongest weapon as your reward, or you can do something that takes 5 minutes and get some experience and money. And what's more, when you do some of them in the endgame, you can unlock additional permanent party members, which is cool, but then that grants you access to the DLC, allowing for a massive amount of extra amazing content to experience. I'm rewarded for granting the game my time to do optional things with so many beautiful stories and experiences, as well as tangible rewards that I can use to have more fun or to make life a little easier that I wouldn't even dare to have missed now that I know that they're there. You don't get that in the Yakuza games. Sure, there's a handful of interesting stories, but why do they still refuse to incorporate main casts as main characters in a sub-story? They've done it only a few times, but it should be a more regular thing. Like, there should be sub-stories that involve Saejima or Minami and Nishida or Jason. Do you know how fucking funny it was when Yagami and Kaito got stuck in that cardboard cutout thing and Sugiura just stares at them? That wouldn't be anywhere near as funny if Kaito was replaced with some side character and Sugiura was just a regular street NPC. But another thing is that if I can get the exact same experience out of a sub-story by playing it as I would if I just watched it on YouTube, then there's a problem. A big one. Goro's heart. Yes, I know it's weird and hilarious and whatever, but you don't actually do anything. The reward you get at the end is a shit crewmate anyway, so I literally could have just watched it on YouTube and have it magically complete in my save file, and I would have gotten the exact same experience. Sure, I can experience the story of a Yakuza game by watching someone else play it or by watching all of the cutscenes, but by actually playing them, I get the full experience. It's a video game, and that's how everything in the game should be. Even though Pirate Yakuza has relatively few sub-stories this time around compared to previous entries, there's still too many. I would rather have 5 awesome, unforgettable sub-stories than have 50 where like 30 of them I won't remember them by tomorrow. So if there's anything to take from this, it's that they should just do more shit like the Kaito sub-story from Garden, because that was cool. Anyway, I'm glad this time around, what would usually be the main side activity has kind of become the main activity, which means that instead of it tacking on an additional however many hours of whatever, it integrates itself into the main course. This is good, because it means that realistically, the main story doesn't take a back seat when you're going out and trying to get all the treasure chests or defeating pirates, because upgrading your ship and your crew directly helps with the main game. So then it's different to something like Dondoko Island in Infinite Wealth, where you only get one single thing from it that helps with the main game that isn't just money. On top of that, all of the minigames besides, like karaoke, can give you a chest or new crewmates, so their reward isn't just having fun or increasing a completion percentage that no one will remember or care about when your post disappears from everyone's feeds 3 hours after you post it. Speaking of forgetting things, did they forget that Fog of War is a bullshit mechanic that no one likes and they should just get rid of it? Like, Majima has a phone. He could just go on Google Maps or even just buy a map from a shop. But even if they really didn't want to get rid of the stupid Fog of War bullshit, I don't know if there's a way to clear it all, but there should be. I discovered every location on the map thinking that would do it, but it didn't do it. But I shouldn't have to do it. Just get rid of it. And even if it's because you didn't want me frame one going straight to the Mahjong parlor on the opposite side of the map and you want me to explore your hard work, at least make it so that only the taxi spots you have to visit in person first or something. But you know what else this game needs? Well, not just this game, but every single one of these games needs a way to delete encounters like in Like a Dragon. It's obviously going to make my life easier as I run around the map to record shit, especially when I'm trying to get shots of buildings and whatever, but also considering how much of a focus these games always have on their minigames and side content, I don't want to be interrupted 700 times by enemies that spawn in front of me when all I'm trying to do is run around collecting fish or some shit. It easily could have been a ring in this, but in all honesty, it should just be an option you can toggle in Premium Adventure. And this is all coming from someone whose favorite thing in every game is the combat. But to conclude this section, I'm going to say something again that I said in the last video, but I didn't really realize how accurate my statement was. The Pirates Coliseum is actually kind of garbage. Sorry everyone, but it is just ship battles and crew battles. Not that they make it boring, but it's the fact that that's all there is. No one-on-ones, and again, none of Gaiden's cool mechanic where you can play as whoever. There's no real difference between different challenges in the Colosseum. It's all just shoot at ships and board them, or just fight groups. I mean, 2 of the playlists are just the same thing, because going back to Gaiden, there were 1v1s, 1 versus minis, minis versus minis, and special little things that, although they were a bit annoying to re-challenge, like Mr. Try and Hit Me, added more variety to it all. But in saying that, much like how Gaiden reinvented the traditional arena side content, this game reinvented another classic minigame with its new baseball minigame. It's way better than the old one, don't at me. It's still the same stuff where you gotta time your button press and aim well, but with some tweaks that make it fresh and more fun. I'd actually like to see more reimaginings of old minigames, in the same way that it's been good to see some reimagined fighting styles, like Crane in Lost Judgment, the Dragon style in Gaiden, and most prominently Mad Dog in this game, which actually this isn't even the first time it essentially got remade, which is pretty cool. Now I don't want to repeat myself too much again, as I have already spoken a fair bit about the combat in this game, but now I'll talk more about the combat of the game. Turns out, in the end, there is only one heat bar. One heat bar is kinda dumb. Even if it's because heat actions are too easy and they want us to use our regular combos, that just means we use the thing that literally requires no resources and can use infinitely. Heat actions are fun, although in this game they're actually kind of lacking. There's a decent amount of them considering there's only 2 styles, but for example they're missing a downed heat action for some reason, as well as having 2 heat actions where you sprint towards 3 enemies instead of spicing it up more. There's also some heat actions that could have replaced others, like the Slugger guard break heat action should have been the heat action for bat items instead of the Yakuza 6 one. Also, nothing consumes heat besides heat actions, as well as taunting doing nothing. There definitely could have been some special heat moves like the perfect guard attacks, which I also haven't done any scientific research, but if those things deal less damage than heat actions, then I will be throwing my computer through a wall because they consume your one and only heat bar. But going back to the first Yakuza game, even it wasn't locked to 1 heat bar. It is a genuinely baffling thing. If you don't want us to spam heat actions and want us to focus on our main tools, make those tools more expansive. EX boost / extreme heat doesn't exist too. In fairness though, in every game it's been a little easy to pull off for a lot of reward, but if they wanted to keep it but nerf it, they definitely could have made it so the gauge drains faster the more attacks you do and whenever you get hit, similar to Judgment draining it when you take damage and Gaiden draining a chunk of it when you do stuff like summon a bunch of drones. But instead, they replaced it with a mode where you can activate it and do nothing, and a different mode where you can activate it and do nothing, and in both cases, you're very likely to win after doing literally nothing. You also can't swap styles during either thing, as well as not being able to do stuff like Yagami can where you can pop extreme heat and pick up heavy objects like motorcycles. It's not too important of a mechanic, that last one, but still, it's just an extra little thing in the game that was taken away for really no reason. Another thing that was taken away was that there were still no equipable weapons. Of course, you permanently have weapons in this, but you did an Ishin 2, and that game still allowed you to equip stuff from your inventory. Funnily enough, besides the Ishin remake, the last of the action games to include weapons as part of your equipment was Kiwami 2. So maybe they're done with that mechanic, but they could have added some of the cool ideas for weapons from Infinite Wealth into this game, and you would have had a lot more fun shit to play with. This also could have allowed for more elements of the Slugger style to have been incorporated into Sea Dog, which I think could have made it stand out even more. For example, considering how much time you spend without heat, the skills to not chunk away any of a weapon's durability in a calm state from Yakuza 0 would have been really useful, or other things like an ability to deflect bullets or whatever. There were also no weapons on the ground in this game. Of course, there's benches and coconuts and whatever, and they also brought back a mechanic from Judgment where when you break a bin, there's usually some goodies in there, including what looks like a Molotov cocktail that you can't use, so maybe it's a leftover from Infinite Wealth, or maybe the enemies can use it. But what I mean about the weapons is that enemies break their weapons when they die, and there are no nunchucks or tonfas or katanas or any of that kind of stuff, which is a bit of a shame. Here's another thing that I was a little depressed about. So first of all, you should have been able to, but there was no way to increase Sea Dog's combo speed. There was for Mad Dog though, in fact there were 2 ways. The first was a ring combo, which I quite liked that idea, and the second was evading an attack last second in Mad Dog. But that mechanic is pulled from an idea from Lost Judgment. However, unlike Lost Judgment, this attack speed upgrade can't be carried over to Sea Dog at all. Sea Dog gets its own thing though, where you can perfect guard an attack and gain an attack buff. Now in Lost Judgment, when you parried with Snake, you'd get a super armor buff, and when you landed a charged finisher with Tiger, you'd get an attack buff. You can't do either of those things in Crane, but you can still carry over and even extend those 2 buffs from the other styles in Crane. In Pirate Yakuza, you can't carry over and extend, even though you can dodge and perfect guard in both styles. A weird decision to not just let me carry over the buff between styles, but whatever. At the end of the day, once again, the combat was still a lot of fun, but there really were many questionable decisions in this game's main combat that I don't know, like, I get a strong feeling that if by some miracle we do get a Judgment 3, RGG are gonna be all, oh, well, Yagami doesn't have to fight kids anymore, so we're removing the snake style, so that way Yagami goes back to having 2 fighting styles. And if that happens, I'm gonna put this as simple as I possibly can so that Sega, you are well aware of the consequences. I will kill myself, but that's the end of the video. If you agreed with any of what I said, then I think you should subscribe. However, if you disagreed with any of what I said, then I think you should subscribe. Once again, I still liked the game, but I had high expectations that unfortunately weren't met. That's not at all because the game was bad, but just because it needed a bit more to it that it seemed to have forgotten, which is ironic given the amnesia, and so I hope we don't look back on this game with anger in our hearts, but instead with hope that the next game takes the lessons learned here and applies them, so that way the next game can be the best thing that ever existed. But who cares about literally anything I said throughout this whole video, because this video took me too long to make, and now Xenoblade X on the Switch is right around the corner. Oh my god!